Great. Welcome back to the December 2nd Committee of the Whole meeting. For those that are perhaps just joining, my name is Andrew Hamilton. I'm the acting mayor for the month of December, so I have the pleasure of chairing the Committee of the Whole meetings. We are currently on item number 4, which is a staff report on neighborhood node commercial zoning amendments. I'll leave it to staff to take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Committee of the Whole. My name is Matt Gunn. I'm a planner here at the District of Squamish, and we have
Asia Philp, planner. So I'm just noticing we're on the wrong screen.
and
Trying to figure that out.
And I'm Jessie Fletcher, manager of current planning.
Today we're here to present and get feedback on proposed zoning amendments in support of the creation of future neighborhood commercial nodes, as well as supporting existing established nodes within our community. We're also seeking feedback on a proposed zoning amendment to update the definition of indoor recreation, which was a council directive from 2022. The Neighborhood Node project is an output of 2 district initiatives as part of the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund, or HAF. The district committed to integrate commercial zoning into new housing areas and existing neighborhoods to support complete and walkable communities as one of the deliverables. The district also secured a UBCM Complete Communities grant in order to assess day-to-day services available to residents via walking and cycling to neighborhood nodes and implement measures to improve access to neighborhood nodes. The proposed zoning amendments that we'll talk about today are direct outputs of those 2 initiatives. The Neighborhood Node project includes 3 phases: research, analysis, and implementation. The research phase identified characteristics of viable neighborhood nodes and provided several insights, including findings that 930 square meters or 10,000 square feet is the amount of commercial space that's considered a minimum threshold for commercial viability and optimization of a node, and that 0.464 meters squared or 5 square feet per resident is the amount of commercial space that can be supported given a neighborhood population. Existing nodes were identified and mapped across the community as part of the research phase as well. Analysis was conducted using the Squamish Insight model. A 5-minute walking and 5-minute cycling distance buffer were examined from existing nodes to determine what areas of the community currently have active transportation access to day-to-day services. There's good distribution of nodes across Squamish, with most neighborhoods having a defined node. 3 of the nodes are slightly smaller than the optimal viable size, those being Brackendale, Panelist South, which is Elpin Lofts, and Stopmas. Most existing residential neighborhoods in the community benefit from cycling access to an existing neighborhood node, with 72% of residents being within a 5-minute cycle of a node. 32% of residents are within a 5-minute walk of a node. Several neighborhoods, Loggers East, University Heights, and areas of Valley Cliff lack access to suitable established nodes. However, those areas have either access to an area where a node's under construction, or there's pre-zoned areas for nodes, or there's anticipated to be some neighborhood planning in the areas that could benefit and provide a node. With analysis of the community as a whole, the most notable gap in access to a node is the Garibaldi Highlands, where no commercial space is currently anticipated.
Thank you. So with those findings, to address the lack of shops and services to meet residents' daily needs in the Highlands, staff are proposing an initial step to allow for neighborhood commercial uses on properties that have frontage along the boulevard. These properties are highlighted in teal on the map shown here. As the Highlands is an existing neighborhood, our opportunities to create a new commercial node are really limited. Properties fronting the boulevard are initially proposed as this street is central to the Highlands, sees the most traffic. It has on-street parking, it has 2 transit routes running along it, and all of this can support business viability. Neighborhood commercial uses are proposed to be subject to the same siting, size, and height constraints as multiple dwelling residential uses in the R1 zone, and are proposed to be subject to the downtown commercial parking standard of 2 spaces per 100 square meters of gross floor area. Staff are of the opinion that this is a reasonable on-site parking amount given the constraints of the smaller lot sizes. Staff also proposed to update the definition of neighborhood commercial to better capture the types of shops and services that will meet people's daily needs. There's one property along the boulevard that is zoned P1, and we're proposing to spot zone this to allow for neighborhood commercial. This is St. Joseph's Church, located at 2449 the boulevard, and it's the somewhat triangular lot shown here. The proposed wording for the R1 zone states that neighborhood commercial uses shall only be permitted on parcels with frontage along the boulevard. The definitions of frontage and front lot line are listed here to clarify that frontage captures any portion of a lot that is touching a public street. So in this example, touching the boulevard, regardless of whether it's a front lot line or a side lot line. To support the viability and potential expansion of existing neighborhood nodes, staff also propose adding assembly and indoor recreation to the list of permitted uses in the local commercial or C1 zone, and adding assembly, entertainment, and restaurant uses to the liquor primary establishment commercial or C6 zone. To ensure any future development contains commercial uses and is not developed solely as a residential development, staff propose adding a percentage employment space requirement into the C1 zone to ensure that a minimum of 20% of the floor area of a development is dedicated as employment space. Staff also propose to increase the height in the C1 zone from 3 stories to 4 stories to partially offset the proposed 20% employment space requirement. And 2 recent examples of 4-story mixed-use development are shown here. One's the Breeze in the North Yard neighborhood to the left, and the Wilfred in the North Tantalus neighborhood to the right. Staff are proposing several engagement opportunities and are aiming for the IAP2 level of consult. A Let's Talk Squamish page went live a couple weeks ago, and it outlines what a neighborhood node is, why we're doing the project, what's being proposed, and how to engage with us. Staff are hosting open houses to get public input on the zoning amendment proposals. One was held last Wednesday, and another is happening tomorrow on December 3rd. We're running a survey till December 7th as well to find out what shops and services residents want or don't want in their neighborhood, where they want to see a node located, and any other concerns or considerations they want us to focus on regarding neighborhood nodes. The Let's Talk page, the open houses, and the survey are being actively promoted through the district's social media channels and advertisements in the chief newspaper. We're also seeking feedback on proposed indoor rec zoning amendments. So council directed staff in 2022 to revisit the indoor rec use definition and consider expanding its applicability. The revised definition is presented here to increase clarity and to remove the reference to requiring it be in a warehouse type of space. A broader scope of activities is listed in the proposed definition. It includes artistic uses. It also covers activities that would have previously fallen under the fitness center definition, which are all proposed to be folded into the indoor rec definition. The Neighborhood Nodes project aligns with policy in several district plans, including the district's strategic plan, our official community plan, our transportation master plan, and our community climate action plan. The commonality between all of these policies is the relationship between land use and transportation. Locating day-to-day shops and services closer to where people live enable residents to choose walking and biking over driving and provide a place for socializing and connecting with neighbors. So given this policy alignment, as well as our HAF and UBCM drivers for the work, staff are recommending that the committee direct staff to incorporate feedback on the neighborhood node commercial zoning amendments and to bring a zoning amendment bylaw forward for readings. We're also recommending the committee direct staff to incorporate feedback on the indoor rec amendments and bring this bylaw forward for readings as well. So that concludes the staff presentation. I'll pass it back to the chair with some question prompts that are listed here to spur discussion and feedback from committee. Back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Just reading the questions. Questions? Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for answering my advanced questions in the presentation. So from question number 2 of mine about the church, it sounds to me like we'd be getting into a situation where the church would be an existing non-conforming use. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's incorrect. So we would be including neighborhood commercial use only for that particular church property and keeping it zoned P1, which permits all the other activities that are currently happening on the property.
Okay. And there's some resident fear around future property assessment increases in value and fears that introducing this change to the boulevard could result in property tax increases that are greater than what have been experienced previous to this change potentially coming about. So I'm curious to know what assessment, if any, has been put into property assessment impacts and ultimately the possibility of increased taxation for those properties along the boulevard.
Thank you, through the chair. I had a conversation with BC Assessment about this specific topic for this specific situation. They indicated that the property assessments are based on sales, not on zoning or permitted uses. So they would look for properties that were similar to any of the properties along the boulevard that if they get this increased zoning, to see a higher sales price before they would change the assessment. In the conversation with BC Assessment, it is unlikely that anything but residential would be the driver of the property values. And so they won't look at the zoning as a consideration. And, you know, in our discussion, we're like, it really, the single family home is going to be the driver of these costs. And then from discussion internally at the District of Squamish, in terms of how we apply our taxation rates, it is based on the information we get from BC Assessment. It's the use that's on, not whether there's another use possible. And so they would be assessed as the residential use, unless a commercial use showed up. They would be assessed as the residential use they are at the value given by BC Assessment. So I do not think that this would lead to that situation that you are highlighting, but understand the concern.
Thanks, Councillor French. And a question on this point, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, appreciate the response and the outreach that you've done to BC Assessment. However, that feels counterintuitive to our experience with, for example, the C4 zoning, where we often hear BC Assessment talking about doing highest and best use in their assessed values, which actually very much drove up a lot of the taxation for our downtown residents. Did you have any feedback on how that might differ here?
Through the chair. Yeah, thank you. I have talked to BC Assessment about what's occurred downtown as well, previously, not as part of this project. But my understanding is that in that situation, there was also a significant increase in the amount of density in residential that was assumed that would land on those properties over time. And so transactions were occurring on those properties that reflected the expected development that would occur there. So somebody was willing to pay more because they could get an apartment building with a bunch of units and they would pay more for that land. And once that's occurred for comparable properties, if you had another property that had the same zoning and could be expected to follow a similar route in terms of the transaction for the land and ultimate development, then BC Assessment would assume that that had a higher value and would make that choice, as you're indicating. When we go to the boulevard, the driver is likely going to be the single family or multiplex zoning, the residential component. That is not expected to change along the boulevard, and those will, whether there could be a small shop or not, that is not expected to be the driver for those prices. It's the residential component. It's just that in downtown, the residential component increased significantly.
Further questions? Mayor Herford and then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Focusing on the Highlands, the Boulevard piece. Thank you for that description around breaking down what frontage means versus, an address on the boulevard. Is staff thinking that the the access for these lots could, if redevelopment was to occur on these on the corners, could be from wherever it is now, like sort of like that commercial facing, say, on the corner that onto the adjoining street, not the boulevard. Is that how that would play out? I'm just trying to visualize that, how we use this, or how this would be used over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. Generally, it's a balance where we reference the subdivision and development control bylaw that regulates where driveway accesses are permitted. So we would probably defer to that, but we also combine that with using common sense about where actually makes the best, safest place to locate an access driveway.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
Can I add something to that? One thing I would like to add to that, one of the reasons that the corners are of interest is that it does provide the opportunity for access off a smaller road, and you might not need to then have a driveway off the boulevard. So you could have frontage that could have like the entrance and make it kind of a bit of more attractive development if there was some kind of corner store there, still getting access for parking in the back. So the corner lots are actually of particular interest, and it's a factor to consider in how we move forward.
Thank you. Okay, that makes some sense. This form, I'm trying to understand what this would look like in when it was built out. I know that even with our R1 zoning, we're not necessarily seeing that come to fruition as maybe the province thought that it might. But just how have we done any work to understand how viable this is and what that would look like if there was like our minds seem to always go to the maximum. Like, what's the maximum that could happen here if you had multiple units, commercial space? Like, what would that physically look like, and does that pro forma work?
yeah, through the chair. Good question. We haven't done that viability. Just to clarify, do you mean kind of financial viability or like feasible about the site and space constraints?
I'd say both in no particular order. I think both are important.
Yeah. So we have not done either, but based on our experience and knowledge about how viable commercial development is, we're always trying to get it out of other developments through tooth and nail, and it's very challenging. So the financial viability is unknown, but probably pretty poor if someone was going to start from scratch and buy a property at its full value versus if they've owned the property for a really long time and can maybe leverage that to do something small. And in terms of the viability of the form or the maximum, we have set the envelope to meet the multi-unit dwelling building envelope constraints. They'll have to still fit parking on the site, which will be a challenge, even if we update the parking requirements. But I would say this is something we're looking for feedback on, and it's a potential limit or requirement that we could look at updating through feedback through committee of the whole as well. Okay, and Matt,
Is it okay if
it's always okay.
I don't want to be. Part of your question was, what is this going to look like over the long haul? And I think maybe that's something we could just speak to. As Asia said, we think the viability is probably quite challenging for this. I don't think we're going to see like shops explode across the boulevard. I think, and also we could spend money on doing financial viability, but that changes over time. And because it's probably a rapid or it's a long-term process, we don't think it's probably worth spending a lot of money on figuring out the pro formas at this stage. I think the likely outcome over time, or we think the likely outcome over time, is that we may see some services which currently we might see as like small businesses, right? Or sorry, home-based businesses. Right now we have 2 physios and a facial medical clinic on the boulevard, that maybe those might continue. We might have a few of those. They might expand slightly where they could have multiple people come in at one time. And hopefully we could see at some point a corner store or a coffee shop show up. But at one point in the last several years, we did have somebody make an inquiry about putting a corner store on one of the corners. The zoning wasn't there. I think it would take take some change in construction costs and maybe some luck to get that to turn out. But I think the long-term expectation is we might see a few more of these little, personal service in existing houses show up, and maybe we get a commercial or two on a corner. That's kind of the vision.
Okay. And I understand adding the use. Is it possible, like, is one of the possible outcomes here is that there is it could be a building that is exclusively that use? Like, could this be, is that
Yes.
how it's written
Yes.
intentionally? Okay. And then the last question is just I see like, and I agree with the logic of the boulevard being central to the Highlands largely and so on. As we go down the boulevard, that sort of diminishes a lot. Just, was there a thought, like, how did we rationalize the scope of this? Like, I understand it's simple to be like on the boulevard, but the impact of seeing something come on the very lower end of the boulevard versus something that's in that like middle block, maybe adjacent to the church or the school, being far more impactful and have more impact. Just how did you arrive at where we landed?
Sure. Yeah. I think we didn't have we considered a range of options, and we could move forward with a range of options. That's something that's fairly easy to change. I think we looked at providing the opportunity for the most number of properties possible, because it's probably going to be, low likelihood that any given place is going to turn into it. So if we want to provide some commercial, we expand and hope that something along there shows up. And there are access points further down, coming up Braemar, that's fairly close to that western end of the boulevard. So it was trying to provide the flexibility that we're offering to the broadest range of suitable locations.
Yep. I wouldn't add anything. We're trying to give the most opportunity to the most people.
But it's something we can change, certainly based on direction.
All right, next on my list, I have Councillor Anderson, then Pettingill, and then Councillor Stoner. Yep, Councillor Pettingill.
Thank you. Just, I haven't spoken to hundreds of people, but who I have spoken to seem quite open to the idea. Some concern about maintaining neighborhood character, that sort of thing. So how would we, or could we time this with DPA guideline changes so it sort of maintains that, like, this is a salon in the ground floor of my home, as opposed to, like, here's a bright white, totally different architecture chain, and does Bill 44 allow us to still do some of those design guidelines?
Yeah. Do you want to check while we chat? Double check? Yeah. So through the chair. Fantastic question. One that we obviously hadn't thought of, but on the fly, I think these guys will be captured within our development permit area 3 guidelines. For a small scale, it would be most likely delegated and stay at the staff level, but in theory, we would be reviewing it against our current DPA 3 guidelines related to, ensuring accessibility and the form and character aspects. So if we determine otherwise, we'll jump back into we'll come back to it.
Okay, and I'm assuming, and I'm thinking things like our sign bylaw and stuff, like maybe people don't want bright neon signs and stuff, but maybe so just sort of understanding the timing of, if we move forward, how those other things come. Just wondering, I have some questions about the more C1 and all of that. Maybe I'll save those. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'll say that was mostly for the boulevard part. The rest are for other things.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I have a fairly general question for the project, and I then will try to explain as best I can why I'm asking it. And the question is, to what extent have staff explored how other communities are revising and making these definitions of specific kinds of amenity needs. There's a complicated picture here. Amenities, neighborhood nodes, cultural uses, indoor recreation. There must be a lot of experience elsewhere in trying to use these concepts and refine them. We also have very distinct neighborhoods with very different pictures. And I'm looking, from the boulevard to Valleycliff. I know Valleycliff intimately. I grew up next to it. And we were without any kind of a neighborhood node other than a grocery store. There was no places for youth to play. And I'd like to highlight this. What about youth? Where does this fit in and their needs in this picture of inventorying needs and potential solutions and definitions and zoning solutions? Down in Valleycliff, finally, we had a couple out of their kind heart. They leased a commercial space and put together a place for youth to hang out. Today in Valleycliff, there's nothing. We have a sort of a neighborhood node in the Waldorf School complex, and then we have the commercial mall. And I'm just trying to relate that picture of needs to our work, staff's work, in trying to define policy and make definitions. We also have 2 upcoming strategy plan exercises that relate to this, it seems to me. One is an updated Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which was intended to explore neighborhood nodes and their needs. We also have the Arts, Cultural, and Heritage Strategy, which also addresses cultural uses and defining them, inventorying them. So, other communities, are we looking at other experience that we can borrow from to better make sense of our needs and this complicated picture? Thank you.
Through the chair. So the concept of the complete communities, where there's a range of park and recreation, day-to-day needs, employment, is a really common concept that gets discussed a lot in many of the, like, we go to planning conferences. It's a topic that comes up in literature. It's discussed fairly frequently. So it's something that we spend a fair bit of time contemplating how to achieve. I wouldn't say that we went out for this specific project and tried to look at how other communities specifically have tackled that. It's more based on the planning theories and planning objectives that are fairly commonly discussed in our profession. With regards to how to address the range of needs that you should have within a complete community, and how does that relate to the boulevard? I think one of the challenges we're facing here is retrofitting an existing neighborhood that didn't initially anticipate those kind of complete community concepts. It's clearly built for a car-dependent lifestyle where people drive to what their services downtown or in the Garibaldi Village, and it is quite challenging to retrofit neighborhoods to create that complete set of activities for youth. And so I wouldn't say that what we're proposing here is something that checks all the boxes to create everything that we would want for the range of people that live in the Highlands. We are trying to do something that's very, a gradual or limited process to provide some day-to-day services. I would say we haven't hit the situation where we're going to have great things for youth, great arts and culture. It's just too hard to do in these, fully built out established neighborhoods. So we're really trying to take an incremental approach that provides what we think is the highest value day-to-day commercial services. It's not the be-all end-all. It's like what is possible, hopefully, within a difficult situation to retrofit a built neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Your phrasing there in taking an incremental approach kind of helps me understand or pose future questions. There's an incremental approach, but there's also a settled overview and inventory and methodology that we will also need alongside. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, a few questions. In the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood plan, we actually introduced the concept of accessory commercial units. And I wonder why, or if there's an opportunity to kind of infuse that perspective here as opposed to like a full-blown neighborhood commercial, but just recognizing some of those smaller scale opportunities for commercial spaces.
You guys want to tackle the ACU? Through the chair, the implementation of ACUs in the Garibaldi Estates is something that's currently being discussed, and there are questions around how exactly that gets rolled out. There's a vision that's presented in the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood plan. I'm not sure that that is 100% exactly as written what will be brought forward. There's some, I don't know, but do you guys want to talk to that at all?
I would say it's something that we're discussing internally and we haven't landed, and we haven't found examples from other communities that we've been like, yes, that totally would fit our needs. And it's kind of more complicated locationally because the estates is so close to the, like, it's one of our main commercial areas. And so this up on the Highlands, we did look through it through a different lens, I would say. That being said, people are like, the R1 zoning is quite permissive. And so I actually think somebody could achieve an ACU, accessory commercial unit type approach on the boulevard.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about like the various models and what we might actually mean by like day-to-day needs and amenities. I'll leave some of my other comments or questions on that to my council colleagues, but I guess one of my other questions is around some of the other existing areas that we've seen built out with neighborhood commercial. So you mentioned the Breeze and Wilfrid. It's my understanding that actually both of these examples still have empty space in them. And so if we think about like the viability and what it is that we're trying to drive, in those examples that we have built out, are they actually providing the services that we hope that they would deliver for our neighborhoods?
Through the chair, the Breeze and the Wilfrid were more C1 local commercial developments. So just making sure there's a distinction there between that's not what our vision is for along the Highlands. It's more of that improving existing neighborhood node areas. And there's so many factors that we can't achieve through zoning to make some, like, we can't force somebody to build a cafe or a coffee shop in a specific place. And it's super challenging in our valley bottom because of the flood construction level. And that's something that we haven't necessarily successfully reconciled. And I know that's kind of something that the Breeze development specifically has struggled with.
And can I add, by your question, when you're asking about what does day-to-day services mean, am I correct in assuming that that is along the lines of, you know, are we looking for those things that you go to regularly, like a small corner store that you get some basic needs, or, you know, a coffee shop where you go on a regular basis? And is that showing up when we create that retail space? Is that along the lines?
Yeah, a little bit. I think where, and again, I think this is more a question to my colleagues, but where my thoughts go is I don't think that we want to be expanding things like personal service establishments and professional office space along the boulevard. I think to me, if we want to try and deliver day-to-day needs, it's like a coffee shop, it is somewhere for community connection, or getting kind of grocery store type corner store items, as opposed to additional commercial space just for the sake of it. And I think one of the considerations that I have is if we expand the option to do kind of the personal service establishment spaces along the boulevard, then it actually draws folks to establish those businesses up there because it's a lower cost for them to do so, as opposed to pushing them down into the existing commercial spaces where we want to see those actually fill out. And so I'm just trying to think about some of the potential unintended consequences of not putting like, I wouldn't call personal service establishment for me is a day-to-day use. It is perhaps a fitting commercial space for adjacent to residential, but it's not something that's going to serve people in that neighborhood on a day-to-day.
Yeah, through the chair. Do you mind if do you want to
Go.
jump on it? Anytime. And interestingly, in line with what you're saying, when we look at the results of the initial results of the survey, the two uses that receive the most support are coffee shop and corner store. And so that's one of our questions is, you know, what uses do we want? I think we have there. Yeah. Essentially, what uses do we want to have?
The initial findings from the.
We do have initial findings we could share if you want. But yeah, we could constrain the uses that are permitted there to a much tighter set of those ones that do meet the direct day-to-day and are aligned with what we're hearing, are of interest from the people there, which may reduce some of the concerns that we're hearing. One of the things with the other services are they are ones that we do see pop up. We do see like somebody wants to do a physiotherapy or a yoga studio, and so it might help create a bit of that node idea where you have a collection of services that people can go to and do a few different things. But so there's a benefit there. It provides some flexibility that people may appreciate, but there could be downsides in that it pulls away from other commercial areas.
And then just one other question, just in terms of, I hear that this will be difficult to do, and I agree with that. I guess I'm curious, like what incentives are there to actually put commercial in that space? So like if I was going to redevelop, even if I'd owned the property for a long time, I have the option to put in 4 residential units. So why would I even bother putting in a commercial unit?
Through the chair, great question. And there are no incentives that we've proposed as part of this package to encourage people to do this. It's more like letting them do it if it's their dream thing to do.
Which I think is the hope, that somebody's like, I really want to have a coffee shop. I know a lot of people up here would love to be able to walk to. There are definitely people that are saying, oh, I'd love to be able to go to a coffee shop. I'd love my kid to be able to go to a little store and grab some stuff. They probably are tough businesses. We would need to have somebody have that vision and like want to do it, which I think could be hard, but.
Right, and if I may add, as Mr. Gunn was referencing earlier, we have had inquiries in the past about this, but the rezoning process for something like this is quite a lot for an individual to take on. So putting some basics in place can help facilitate that in the future.
Mayor Herford?
Just back to the Highlands piece, as written, would something like a little sort of trailer that does ice cream or something, like at the bag has that one that's on the side, or something similar that does coffee, like, are we permitting that use by making the change that's contemplating here, or does this exclusively apply to like new builds, and how is that? Or if I'm thinking food trucks in someone's front yard but has a couple parking, like, are all those things on the table as it's written here, or is this only in like inside the building envelope?
Through the chair, I'll start and then I might get Jesse to cross-check what I'm saying. But if retail is permitted or restaurant is a permitted use, then you are allowed to have a mobile vendor on a property that is zoned that allows those uses. So that could be another opportunity. Oftentimes we see mobile food trucks being not mobile at all, and so that's similar to what we would maybe want to achieve here. So it's something to consider. We could certainly zone to not permit them if there was strong feedback in that regard, but right now the zoning would permit that.
I'm going to contemplate that. Thank you for the response. The sort of a similar use that I think is a not desired is like would be a drive-through of one of those. Is that use covered elsewhere in our bylaws around restricting serving directly to someone in a vehicle, given that our stated goals here are that sort of walkable and so on? Is that covered elsewhere? Because it's not explicit in the zoning here.
Yeah, through the chair, it is covered off. We'd previously, I think maybe that must have been 10 years ago. It was a long time ago that we essentially only permitted it on places that had existing existing operations, and then it was not permitted everywhere else in town across the board.
Okay, thank you. That was my recollection as well, but it's nice to know that's there.
Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I have some feedback on the Boulevard sort of area, but then some questions around C1, C6. So should I move on to the questions now, or do you want the feedback on the?
Let's finish up with questions and then we'll go through rounds of feedback. If it's not too complicated, we'll try to do feedback on all of them, separating them in your comments as best as possible.
Okay. So just wondering why, and it seemed to be called out, like, given some of our needs and some of the things we're hearing from youth and so on, especially, why no arcades in the C1 or C6?
Through the chair, arcade is covered off under entertainment use, and we're proposing, that's a permitted use in the C1 zone already. And we're proposing to add entertainment use to the C6 zone, which is the liquor primary. There's 2 properties in the district that are zoned C6 currently. It's the Backyard Pub and the Shady Tree.
Okay, and then just some other things, and so maybe they're just covered under other definitions, but like I think music gyms or studios, like recording studios, karaoke, bowling alley or small theater, or like, and sort of thinking about some of the stuff we hear from some of the performing arts folks about a small theater studio or dance studio, like a small one. Are these all included in the C1, C6 definitions, or are some of these outside that? And I guess why would they be excluded if they are?
I would say most of the things that you listed off are either included under the entertainment definition, but I'd encourage you to go through and read that definition in the zoning bylaw, or the proposed new indoor rec definition would likely capture some of those other uses. And those are both permitted in the C1 zone.
Okay, yeah, I did. It was just, I tried to do that. It's just sort of hard to understand sometimes, or I think they fit, and then when someone goes and so they don't. So that's sort of why I'm asking about those specifically. And I just, I will probably never just have the capacity to do this, but I'd love to own a recording studio, right, in the ground floor of a home someday. But also sometimes those would be more appropriate in a light industrial space, which made me start thinking, well, are there actually light industrial uses that kind of fit in this area that would help make it more sustainable? Is there a way we can draw lines to be sort of, I want contrary things, as flexible as possible, but not get the wrong things in there? Like,
It's challenging for staff to answer in every particular scenario, but as a general approach, I would say that we would consider a recording type studio to fall under artistic uses, which we're including in the indoor rec definition, which is before you today and is permitted in certain areas of the business park in industrial areas.
Okay, thank you. And then the other piece, and I may have misunderstood this a bit, but I know we've been having some conversations about the amount of employment or office we require and so on. From what I read of the C1, C6, it seems to allow for someone to go to only 20% employment space and 80% residential, which seemed contrary to some of our ideas of understanding it's challenging in the current economic context, but really wanting to see a higher ratio of employment. Did I read that right? Like, does this in some cases allow a reduction in the employment space requirement?
Through the chair, there was no employment space requirement in the current C1 zone. And our apartment was a permitted use. So potentially somebody could take over a C1 zone property and redevelop it to be 100% residential. And so staff wanted to secure a minimum amount of employment space. What we're proposing is in line with the C4 minimum requirement off Cleveland Avenue, everywhere else that's zone C4. And generally what we see a lot after having gone through our office analysis, close to what a lot of developments are able to hit when they're doing mixed use.
Okay, thanks. And then the last thing, just wanting to understand FCL and commercial. A couple of weeks ago, my understanding had been that commercial was allowed below the flood construction level in Squamish, as long as it wasn't in a floodway. But I understand I got that wrong, and so just wanting to clarify the relationship between commercial and flood construction levels and what our expectations are right now.
Yes, through the chair, in the floodplain management bylaw, there's a downtown commercial exemption. So places, commercial downtown can be at grade and doesn't need to elevate. Anywhere outside of the downtown needs to meet the flood construction level. So same as what we're seeing residential uses elevated to, commercial would also need to be elevated to that. There's no exemption for it.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, did you have a come back to one? A different question. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I did want to pick up on the new definition of indoor recreation and appreciate the thought that's gone into this. One thing that I am curious about is, well, I appreciate it says includes but is not limited to. Sometimes adding examples actually further limits our application thereof. So if we've missed something, we're like, well, it's not in the list. And so like, depending on our interpretation of the day. I guess I'm curious staff's feedback as to like whether it's useful to have those as examples, whether we take them out, whether we need to continue to add to make sure it's as exhaustive as possible. One example that was brought to my attention that's not in there is around like acting type studios, like drama falls under artistic use, I would suspect, but maybe not in somebody's future definition thereof. And so I'm just curious if it's helpful to have that list or if we take it out entirely.
Thank you, through the chair. Totally understand the suggestion that a list of uses can sometimes be limiting. We think in this situation, because we've used the word participation, that it will allow us to interpret it in a consistent manner moving forward. So an acting studio involves participants. So it's more of that kind of training activity that we were missing before. The including will help with business licensing and inquiries from the public and add a lot more clarity where there were a lot of uses missing that what could have fallen previously within fitness center or indoor recreation. So from a planning perspective, we do prefer having a bit of a list and including that language included but not limited to.
And just on this point, I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but I thought I've heard folks refer to artistic, but I don't see the word artistic in the indoor recreation definition. Second line. Okay, I was reading. Okay, because in the examples of the artistic, it appears to be drawing, painting, pottery, sculpture, which is like focused on that producing an object artistic, not performing arts or music. So staff's interpretation is that there's no question that that will be like performing arts and music would be included in this definition.
Through the chair, it would be our understanding that it would be included. Again, the participatory activities is really the critical piece here. We are certainly open to adding additional uses, but having a list is really helpful for both the public and when we're interpreting definitions.
Further questions or comments? If not, I've got a couple of my own. I'll just a couple and then come back. Yeah. On to back to the neighborhood nodes on the boulevard. The suggestion of 2 parking spots for commercial uses. I see a tension here because we want to drive. What we want here are commercial node or neighborhood node uses. My vision there is somebody walks to the corner store, walks to the coffee shop. The more parking we have there, the less comfortable that becomes, right? The boulevard is also got a barrier. So you can turn in and out in the same direction. So driving somewhere is considered to one location and sometimes requires a drive all the way around inside a school zone, etc. So I have some concern that a parking requirement will in some ways drive more traffic, more vehicular traffic to potentially a school zone and into a neighborhood that's already managing a reasonable amount of vehicular traffic. So my suggestion or my thought would be to remove the parking requirement and allow places to develop that are predominantly walking focused. Is there a big downside to removing the parking requirement?
So I would say the biggest risk associated with that at this point is that in the engagement so far, parking has been one of the #1 concerns that has been raised. Parking, and increased vehicle traffic, interestingly, that too, being in the school zone. So there's a tension there. I would say that removing the parking requirements would probably be beneficial for supporting viability of these locations or proposed ideas. So the approach we proposed is tries to balance some of these and maintains a low parking standard similar to downtown with some parking. But as with all of it, we are open to direction from council. But the risk would be that it's the topic that comes up probably the most. Oh, yeah, we got.
Yeah, I might add one more thing is that it's likely that like a potential future business might try to incorporate as much parking on site as possible, and we have parking maximums too that would be in effect for these properties.
Troy, do we have parking maximums? Oh, did not know that. Is that in section 41 or 42 of the parking?
41.
Interesting. Thank you. I'll go read those.
I also just want to quickly follow and circle back to Councillor Pettingill's question about controlling form and character. So I just want to confirm that yes, commercial proposal would be subject to our form and character development permit area 3 unless it was an accessory building less than 50 square meters, which has an exemption from DPA 3.
Yeah. Any follow-up on that, Councillor Pettingill?
Maybe just, well, it's have to read, I'd sort of want to make sure that sort of understand, does DPA 3 say if residential then this, if commercial then that, whereas I think we want sort of, the desire I've heard for is sort of a cohesive residential feel with commercial sort of fitting into that residential look and feel. And so just understanding, so it's good to know that DPA 3 would be the place. I guess I would question is it up to what we would want to work with this or not? And I just don't know. I'd have to reread on that basis. Thank you.
Merford?
Just on that DPA piece, would that be a next step of this if we know that this initiative would trigger DPA 3, but we want to make sure we're getting the outcome that we want from start to finish? Is staff intending to revisit the DPA 3 or at least do a scan to see if it needs updating with this kind of new concept?
Through the question at this time, given that the current DPA 3 would apply to anything over 50 square meters, we would not recommend revisiting DPA 3. It was not our intention unless council were to direct otherwise. Something under 50 square meters would be sort of within that accessory commercial dwelling unit we were referencing before, so it would be quite small. And unlikely necessary to go through another district planning process.
Okay, yeah, I haven't reviewed it with this lens, which is, so maybe that's, I'll leave that there. The 20% employment space piece is C1. Sorry, I'm kind of got questions in multiple categories here. I appreciate that there were examples of what the height and massing sort of look like, but do those examples meet the 20%? Like, just what are we looking at there? I just trying to envision what this looks like in a practical sense. And perhaps this is just like for a future, it'd be interesting to have a, something that a reference point, because these things are challenging concepts.
Yeah, through the chair, I actually don't know what the percentage employment space is in the examples. I would hazard a guess that it is somewhere in that 20% realm.
Okay, yeah, and maybe if we're going to use those examples, which are useful for other things, we can just sort of do that, so we can add that on there for context. The parking requirements for the commercial, back to the Highlands piece. When we require parking for a commercial operator, we require that they exist, but what controls are there over time that they're used for the purpose of in this case, the commercial use? So it's not just an overflow parking for the residential use, or I suppose staff parking is important to the operations of a business, but also is that what we're aiming to achieve with parking regulations on site? And just like, yeah, where do we stand and how much control do we have or should we have over that?
Through the chair, we review at the time of development permit and building permit. Then we do our inspection, and after that, we don't go back and follow up unless there's a change of use or somebody comes in proposing a new business or something changes on the property.
Yeah, I think this is a challenging area, and it's one of those things that gets me sometimes. We as a group create these parking requirements, and then we have, I know that there's some that are close by that are labeled exclusive use of a commercial operation in the building that only operates once a month, and those 4 spots are just associated to that with a no one else can park here sign. And meanwhile, we've got a air quotes parking issue that we can't seem to regulate. So I think this being so closely adjacent to the residential use I'm challenged by that those spots would actually be for commercial, which might go back to council. We might actually just end up being the space where you're thinking, Councillor Hamilton. I was trying to turn that into a question somewhere, but I guess is there in other jurisdictions, is this actual piece regulated in some way? Like, it feels like it's a big lift. I understand why we're not, but I'm still a little frustrated with the outcome that we get from time to time.
Through the chair, we're not aware of any examples of other municipalities that successfully kind of regulate post permitting.
All right, seems like questions are winding down as our questions turn into comments. A question for staff on our comments. Would you prefer them captured in motions, or would you prefer them captured as comments, individual comments within our motions with the receipt of the motion? It's just how direct do you want us to be? Do you want to see consensus on a topic, or are you happy with potentially differing views?
Yeah, I'm hearing that we're okay with comments. Consensus not totally necessary at this stage because we're also still actively running our public engagement and we're trying to assimilate everything into one final thing to bring forwards as we usually do.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So with that, I would think I'd be looking for a motion to oh, wait a minute. Looking for the staff recommendation. Would anybody like to move that? Mayor Herford moves the staff recommendation, and I assume we'll do comments and feedback in our when we speak to it. Seconder, Councillor Stoner seconds. Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work on this. I think it's these are all useful and important initiatives. I received some letters from a class at Don Ross, and the Highlands and having access to services in the Highlands was actually the subject from one of the students. And including some suggestions that I actually see reflected in this policy here. So we've got some bright minds coming through, and I think I take those asks from youth in our community quite seriously, as there'll be the folks that will be living with our decisions here the longest. I do think that the commercial space in the Highlands makes good sense to me. I think when we're doing our public engagement. And I was able to attend the one in Bracknell last week, really being clear that they're separate things. Like I think that the public, often looks at our things and responds with can respond with a bit of fear. And if I'm thinking about adding the commercial space usage in the R1, and what I see in there is the Breeze and the Wilfred in the same. I get we're doing separate pieces. It's almost like they need big red numbers. Initiative 1, Initiative 2, or something, because I found I was having some conversations, and I have not just there, but in the community, that conflate the two, the multiple initiatives that we're discussing here. That's more about how we're engaging, but I think it might skew some of the feedback, and this is where I'm coming from. I do. So I'm supportive of this, and I think the changes to the C1 make good sense to me. I would like some context for that, and I know it's out there somewhere, just to sort of find an example that's close, even a little more, a little less, so we can kind of have an idea of what that looks like. And thank you for the work on the indoor recreation use. I think that makes good sense. So all in all, I think we're going in the right direction here, and I'm curious to see what the what the responses are broadly from the community, whether it's in Let's Talk or in person. So thank you very much for the work.
Let's go clockwise. So Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, appreciate the discussion today and the many points of consideration in this important topic. I think it's something that we've been talking about for a long time in terms of neighborhood nodes, how we make them work, how we make sure that people have access to day-to-day services more readily close to home. I think to me, the biggest piece of feedback is I am leaning towards actually like quite substantially restricting the types of services that would be allowed in the Highlands. If I think of day-to-day services, as I mentioned earlier, to me, that's not a larger scale physio or personal service establishment. It really is like that corner store, that cafe, the things that bring community together. There's perhaps a gray area here around like what we've been calling like a rec hub, like where youth can connect in some way. Maybe it's kind of indoor recreation. I'm not entirely sure, but it's not necessarily a fitness center. That's probably not entirely clear. But for me, it's like I would rather go narrower on the allowable uses along the neighborhood, in the Highlands, as opposed to more broadly. Because I do think that there are existing spaces where I think we want to try and drive more of that personal service establishment took existing commercial nodes, not necessarily neighborhood commercial nodes. And I think that ties into the parking needs. So parking needs to me are driven by the allowed uses and who is trying to get there. So I'm not picking my hairdresser based on location. I'm picking on my hairdresser on who's going to cut my hair best. So I will drive or I will ride my bike to whoever is going to cut my hair better. But I will go to my local coffee shop with my kids because I want to walk there and do something with them. So those just feel different to me. And I think that that is important and changes the way that we talk about potentially parking needs. I do think giving a little bit of further thought, I'm really encouraged to hear that there's some thought going into the accessory commercial units in the Garibaldi Estates. And if there's anything that we can glean from that into how do we allow those, if there's just one person who wants to run a physio out of their home, they typically can do that. We don't necessarily want them to have 3 beds, but if they can have an accessory commercial unit to do so, and we can streamline that for them, then great. And my only other direct piece of feedback is that I would like to see a specific line item that says performing arts and music in the indoor recreation definition as part of the example list, just to be very clear about that. But generally, I look forward to hearing what else we hear from the community through the outreach and engagement and the next round of conversation on this.
Thanks very much, Councillor Greenlaw.
Yeah, happy to support this motion. I think this seems to me like a fairly low-hanging fruit for facilitating local businesses, for helping neighborhood nodes be built in an organic way where individuals can kind of prosper and pursue, maybe personal goals of owning a little cafe with lower risk margins, it seems to me. So I'm happy to support this. I think it's I got a little bit excited when you're talking about different business ideas that could be there. I think it's going to introduce some really fun, walkable possibilities for people. If people take the bait. Thanks.
Councillors French.
Thanks, Chair. I generally liked everything that I saw in the staff report on these issues. And as a former resident of the Boulevard, I would have liked to have seen this all happen when I lived in the neighborhood. So I'm hoping that those residents of the Garibaldi Highlands who had their first initial introduction to this frightened by it might look at it through my lens as a former resident who would have been excited to see this for the neighborhood. And just one commercial application or opportunity that I think wouldn't fit well into the neighborhood would be vehicle mechanic shop, even like small scale. Noise would be an issue for me there, and dealing with fluids like fossil fuel, oils, all that. And just one piece of feedback on the indoor rec ask. I do like the idea of having the examples include acting, dramatic performance, and along that line. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I think I agree with much of what's been said. Add a few things. Not totally sold on the focus on the boulevard. And my concern is that I do fear, because it is a key, although it's a school zone and I have seen speeds come down a fair bit most of the time, it's still the route to the university and beyond. And I worry that it becomes a coffee shop for everyone going to from the university and everything. And I worry that that location does pull it more towards a destination or a pass-through commercial as opposed to neighborhood commercial. And in some of the conversations I've been having about neighborhood hubs and stuff with people, they like, well, we already have them. They're called schools, which is made me think about Garibaldi Highlands Elementary. It's been, I can't remember if it still is, but it's used as an adventure hub on the weekend. And so if there was, a variety store with slushies on the other side, then the people doing their mountain biking can access it, the kids playing in the park and all of that. And there is a pathway through to the boulevard, but psychologically it's not accessible. It's not sort of part of that thing. And so I do wonder if maybe expanding this to some of that area or making it just in that area actually helps keep it more of a neighborhood sort of service thing. And sort of along these lines, I guess there's a tension between people who live there wanting to maintain some street parking as an overflow, although most of the residents along there actually have a lot of on-property parking. But big parking requirements on the boulevard, I think even just doubles down on this, like this is a destination, which is not what we want. We don't want destination retail there, I think. I do think, I wouldn't want a big in-depth review of DPA 3, but I would want at least a pass through of what does DPA 3 mean in the context of this or vice versa. Just echo, because I've heard it so many times, a real desire for youth gathering in commercial spaces that are free or cheap for the youth. And I know there's a tension there, but and maybe that's where the variety store piece comes in, or a little variety / tea shop or something. Just on the C1, C6, I do think we should consider whether we relax our FCL around commercial, and maybe that comes with a notice on title. I wonder what opportunities there are to require tenant notice if you're, as the landowner, maybe the issues, but do your tenants know if they're leasing commercial space, and is there a way we can require that they're made aware of the risk, and if that can mitigate and open up some opportunities? And then just I appreciate that the 20% commercial requirement is a new requirement and an improvement of where we are. I'm not quite sure that's enough. And I think I'd lean to wanting to see either more there or clear understanding of how the residential piece matches employment elsewhere. I'm just sort of anything we do, I'm wanting to understand that there's close, walkable, accessible employment near the housing, where the pay of the type of commercial form or industrial form matches the likely pricing of the residential. And I know that's not an easy thing, but failing that sort of broader plan, not sure 20% quite gets me there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Firstly, I think that there's been some thoughtful work done in reflecting the staff report on amending definitions. I think there's some good work done there. Regarding the Garibaldi Highlands and specifically the boulevard, this is a very clumsy project. Spot rezoning essentially in an older neighborhood, and what is going to be absolutely necessary is dialogue with that neighborhood. For our conversation today, our council conversation, I would have preferred to see the results of survey exercises and the public information meetings, and that would have perhaps stimulated conversation in different ways today. I'm in agreement with Mayor Herford's comment about, for the purposes of our public engagement, that the initiatives be clearly identified and the context for their application be clearly identified. The neighborhoods are just so diverse, and there's quite a number of things going on. The boulevard, and I'm hearing this from residents there, is the commercial traffic and parking concerns are going to be important to consider. More general comments. Councillor Stoner referred to unintended consequences. I think there's all kinds of risks in virtually every neighborhood for these. And we're unintended consequences with respect to viability and also competing development projects. We are expecting to do similar things, and who's going to do what and who benefits and who loses. Again, dialogue with the neighborhood, but also dialogue with the development proponents in some cases. With respect to viability, this is just a footnote, or if you like, it's an example. I see that North Crumpet and a future potential commercial node is referenced. As I pointed out during the Transportation Master Plan, the viability of that commercial node would be vastly, dramatically improved with a connector route between Finch and Westway. There's no question. It's just one example of the local geography of viability that we're going to have to explore again and again to avoid the unintended consequences. Generally, I'm skeptical that this is the best use of our planning department's time. And I'm pointing at the Housing Accelerator Fund and the UBCM Complete Communities Program. They're distracting us from other important business. Employment lands business, also on the waterfront, but also our Parks and Recreation Master Plan update and the Arts, Cultural and Heritage Strategy, Tactic 6.4, the district role in identifying needs and targets for cultural spaces. These are two exercises that would be very important to inform what we're doing. Finally, and this is a footnote, I see that Brackendale Bean is referred to in tables 1 and 2. We should instead be referring to Eagle Run. Eagle Run is a traditional name for that neighborhood, subdivision, and commercial node, and it comes from a world-famous fly fisherman in the 1960s who used to hang out here, and he is buried a few graves away from Winston Churchill, and that's the name of that neighborhood, Eagle Run. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Always a historical tidbit. So thanks very much, staff, for all the work on this. On the Garibaldi, I'll try to break down my comments piece by piece. On the Garibaldi neighborhood, neighborhood commercial nodes, I think this is the right direction. I see there's a tension between, trying to do something within a neighborhood that's already been developed where we do not have control over saying this business must go here. I'm sure that's a frustrating place for planning staff to be in, but I'm sure you're accustomed to it because we don't purchase land and put a particular business there. So I think the approach of opening up the zoning to allow businesses that feel that they can flourish in that space do so without the added pressure or cost of rezoning. I do think that we should remove the parking minimum from the zoning requirement there. I see adding parking minimums as actually increasing the amount of traffic we're going to be drawing to the neighborhood. And I think that these neighborhood nodes, in my vision, work better when they're a place people walk to. The less parking that's there, the more likely people are to walk to it. I agree with Councillor Stoner's notion of narrowing the services. Unfortunately, I can't articulate exactly in what way to narrow the services, except to say something like things that people are more likely to walk to. A coffee shop, a small grocer. Those are things that are somebody's more likely to just grab something on their way by. And I think that's it on the Garibaldi. Oh, the one other thing on the Garibaldi, there seems to be a property that's not zoned R1 way off on the far east of the map that looks like it's a P1 that may not be, maybe it should be excluded, but I'll leave that to you to decide. On the C1, C6, I'm in agreement with the changes there. I think that the 20% makes sense, considering that's basically the bottom story of a 4-story building. And then on the indoor recreation, because we do give examples of paintings, drawings, pottery, and sculpture, and similar items, I think it might be valuable just for absolute clarity to add something in the line of performing arts and music. So further comments from Councillor Pettingill and then Mayor Herford.
Yeah, I just want to say, and partly in response to one of my colleagues' comments, was able to attend the engagement last Wednesday on this topic, and unfortunately, I'm going to miss the one tomorrow. But there were questions about how we were assessing what was available versus allowed, and how we were scoring the different neighborhoods in the assessment, and there was a lot of great discussion and a lot of sort of understanding and nuance from staff that I didn't realize that staff were able to bring. And to the, I understand Bill 44 and so on has put extra work on us. And so some of that detail maybe isn't in this report, but I'm seeing that as staff actually doing quite a good job of sort of balancing what we need to do versus really paying attention and being aware of what the community needs are. And I saw that come out, and it was really great discussion. So thanks to staff on that. And I think, some of the concerns that were raised are actually coming up, and staff are aware, and that's happening in the conversation. And I'm sure we'll see that in the final results. Thank you.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Just if I could, just back to staff at this point, I have a question. The recommendation was to bring the zoning amendment bylaw forward for readings for both of these items. We still have the public engagement underway, and I'm a little hesitant to this part of the motion. I haven't heard a lot of, like, around the table. I hear broadly compatible things, a couple points. So in some ways, I'm supportive of bringing for readings as a next step. But as this is worded, does that preclude staff from bringing it back to a cow if we get a bunch of divergent feedback from the community?
Thank you for that question through the chair. What's really precluding us from bringing it back would be our timing with the Housing Accelerator Fund. This task should be completed by the end of January. So we are running out of time a little bit. I think if we saw something completely divergent in the comments, we would likely try to find some space to bring it back before we brought it for readings. But our intent is to bring it back for readings before the end of January.
Okay, and we've bundled and likely it is that one piece that is, to me, feels the most contentious of the pieces of this. But okay, I think I was contemplating an amendment, but I'm going to leave it as is, and we'll see where we go.
All right, with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Motion carries. Thank you very much, staff. And I think that one goes to Mayor Herford.
I would like to move that we terminate this meeting. Thank you, Councillor French.
I do think I saw Councillor Stoner. No, Councillor French second. Councillor French seconds. All those in favor and opposed. Councillor Stoner is opposed to terminating this meeting.